Christ has been made flesh. Now he's human, he's got blood. So when Mary wears red, she's already conceived Christ. It also shows her love for Christ. Now, we see that there's a man sitting next to the steps, and that's Joseph. Figure. That's because he's not actually the father of Christ. So, who's the daddy? Well, God is the daddy. And if you look carefully here, there is an implied line or kind of an invisible line that connects Mary through Christ to the sky. And the exact point here, where it's blue and white, is the exact color of the blue and white on Mary. And this kind of invisible or implied line connects Mary to God, showing he's the Father. Well, you can see that Joseph here is looking very different from the other figures. And there's a lot of X's. There's an X here with the staff. There's this body. And even though the song Stairway to Heaven didn't occur for another 400 years, you can see here that we have a stairway to heaven, but Joseph is blocking it because he's not the way to get to heaven in this belief system, which is Catholic. Well, let's look at the Catholic ideas in this picture. First of all, can you see the key shape of a triangle? Remember, key shape is a shape that's shown over and over again, similar to alliteration in English. So if you said little Lola likes licking lemon lime lollipops, you're trying to repeat the la 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 shape to give the impression of licking lollipops. In the same way, here, Poussin has used the key shape of a triangle because you may remember that triangles can show spirituality. So what we see here is one implied key shape of a triangle where there's a large triangle and the overall grouping of the figures. Now, can you see any other triangles in the figures? If you said, yeah, I see one right here with the lady in yellow and the baby. And then I see another one here with Mary and Christ. And then I see another odd one here with Joseph. So now we have a trinity of triangles, and the Trinity is very important in Christianity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. So who is this lady on the left who's wearing yellow? Well, you'll read this lady looks older. She's wearing a white shawl, so she's got some purity to her. This is Elizabeth from the Old Testament, who gave birth to John, John the Baptist, who will pass the knowledge or the apple of the Old Testament to Christ to form the New Testament. So Elizabeth originally couldn't bear children. She prayed for a long time. The birth of her son John was a miracle, and the idea is that this presaged the miraculous birth of Christ. So we see here on a lower level, we have Elizabeth and John representing the Old Testament and the joy and happiness of Elizabeth as she's given birth to John. We've already spoken larger. If Elizabeth stood up and Mary stood up, Mary would be way taller than Elizabeth. This is known as hierarchical scale, HEIRARCHICAL, hierarchical scale. A hierarchy means there's one thing that's more important than another. And when you make something larger than another thing, it means that it's more important. A hierarchical scale is to show psychological importance. So Mary is not physically really taller than Elizabeth, but she's made bigger and more important because psychologically in this painting, she's more important than Elizabeth is. So Mary is an example of hierarchical scale. Christ. You'll notice that Christ is under an archway. Now, the artist could have put this archway anywhere they wanted to, but they very intentionally put the archway over Christ. That's because the building behind Christ is like a temple entrance. And in old times, you wouldn't actually go into the temple. You would wait outside the temple for the priest to come and take your petition. Well, now the temple or the church is um, around Christ. Christ has become the center of the church. So that's what that archway means. I also know that when I look at the implied line from Elizabeth to John through Mary through Christ, I see right after Christ this little dark quarter circle, and that's a crypt. So the idea is that Christ will die and go to heaven. So if you start at the Old Testament, receive the knowledge of the New Testament with Christ in the church, you will be able to go by the crypt or bypass death to get to heaven. See how there's a dark cloud here? That dark cloud is made so that your eye will stop there at the brightest point in the sky, so that when this implied line here, which is the reference to God. Cycle of life or cycle of nature. And here I see a circular big tub of something or pot. I see these circles on a tree, and I see this circular vessel here. Okay. This bottom one, if you'll notice, has water coming from it. So that's the baptismal font. And so baptism with John the Baptist, and here we have the baptismal font. The water that's used in the baptism is the first step. The next step is a tree of knowledge. See how it has fruit on it? And in fact, um, John is passing knowledge, the knowledge of the Old Testament, onto Christ, who will transform it into the New Testament. So the second part of these circles is about the knowledge, spiritual knowledge during life. You'll notice that on the third circular object on the left, that the greenery is up in the sky. And this is after you die, you will get eternal life in heaven. The reason it means that is that it is one that never in in Europe never dies. It stays green all the time. So it's evergreen, everlasting. This fruit, as you can see, is right below John the Baptist. So it's the fruitfulness of life if you become baptized. The next object here is incense. Incense is burned as a sacrifice. So it shows the sacrifices that Joseph makes and the sacrifices that are made in life. This little box is called an ossuary. An ossuary is where they would put the bones of the dead. In the 1600s, you would be put into a crypt until you fell apart, disintegrated, and then they would collect your bones and put them into one of these boxes, which is called an ossuary. So that is your life after death. So when we look at this piece by Nicolas Poussin, we see that there's a trinity of triangles used to show spirituality. The lower triangle on the left shows Elizabeth and John, signifying the Old Testament. The hierarchical scale of the taller triangle in the middle represents Mary of heaven, red for her love for Christ, but also the fact that Christ has been made flesh, red blood, and she wears white to show her purity. The third triangle is a very different triangle to show that Joseph is part of the picture, but is not the Trinity himself. He's not the father of the Trinity. You'll also notice that Joseph wears purple to show his status. That's a high status. And you'll notice that he also wears a little bit of yellow to show that he's joyful in this role. Let's look at this next piece and see what happens. All right, here we have Raphael Sanzio, Madonna of the Chair. The correct name for this artist is okay. During the Renaissance, people were known by their first name, not their last. So you had Leonardo, who was Da Vinci, Michelangelo Buonarroti, but you wouldn't call Michelangelo Buonarroti, he's Michelangelo. So use the name Raphael. Now, Madonna is what you call Mary after she's given birth, okay? She's the Virgin Mary before Christ is born, and then she's a Madonna or a mother after Christ is born. There were thousands of Madonna paintings painted. This is just notice in Poussin's painting that Mary holds Christ out kind of in a detached fashion. That was stylistically more common because usually the artist showed Mary offering Christ to the world. Raphael painted both the Madonna and Christ very differently. Here, Mary is shown as just an everyday girl. She's not looking queenly. She's not got hierarchical scale. Raphael was known for taking just common subjects and painting them as religious figures. She's also holding Christ very tightly as a mother would, not wanting to let him go. The second baby here is again John the Baptist. There was almost a formula from the 1500s to past the 1600s on how you would show certain religious subject matter. We know that this is John the Baptist because he's off to the side and he's carrying the cross as though he would carry Christ, into being baptized. Let's look at what Raphael did with shapes here. First of all, the whole painting is not rectangular like a window, but is obviously a circle. These circles are called tondos, Tondo. A tondo is a round painting. Notice here that Mary and Christ are looking fairly intently out to the viewer, and it's psychologically kind of normal if somebody catches your gaze to continue looking at them. So we're going to start as though our focal point, our area of greatest contrast or interest, are these eyes. Now remember that yellow means happiness and red means love. And we saw that in Nicholas Poussin's Holy Family on the steps, the yellow and the red of joy and happiness. So what Raphael does here out the piece to help draw our eye around. So when we start at Mary's eyes and go through Christ's eyes, we hit this yellow, joyful, happy color of Christ clothing. We come down Mary's arm. Now notice here that she's got a little bracelet on that's also gold. This helps connect your eye heat from Christ to Mary. I'm going to go up her red arm and then look at her shawl. The only place on her shawl that has yellow and red is this band right here, and it's prominently featured. And that's so that your eye will go from the yellow to the red to the yellow and red. And sure enough, when I look at her white, pure shawl, here Raphael has embellished it with yellow and red stripes. So that keeps your eye coming around. Now you come down here to John the Baptist to notice him second. We know that Mary wears blue as the Queen of Heaven. Now, if your visual literacy is really good, you'll remember that when we saw Audrey Flack's Wheel of Fortune, there was a blue cloth in the lower right-hand corner. Audrey Flack knew exactly what she was doing because in the history of art, this is almost like a language of color and shapes that artists have used throughout centuries, and that now advertisers are kind of using to sell products. Advertisers have picked up their language from fine art. So anyway, we're starting on this journey of the yellow and the red through the stripe on the shawl, up here on the scarf, down here through Mary's clothes. We come up through Jesus's feet and we bump into this dark red and yellow pole. That's the chair. I also notice that there's something back here from her shawl that gets very confusing. So my eye stops here. Once my eye comes around and goes here and is stopped by this strong, powerful vertical line. Remember, we said vertical lines show strength and power. So this is a strong vertical line. My eye bumps back here, goes back around, comes back through the spiral I just took. And what happens is Raphael has created this kind of rocking motion of circles. Now, circles show love and nurturing and the cycle of life. But here, the rocking is almost like Mary keeps hugging her child over and over again. And Raphael was aware of using circles to show that motherly love. Now we're going to jump forward a few centuries, and this is Edward Degas, Jockeys Before the Race, almost at the 1900s, 400 years later. Remember I said that a vertical line shows power and strength? Well, the name of this painting is Jockeys Before the Race, not during the race, not after the race, before the race. So what Degas wants you to do is think of the energy and nervousness of the horses before a race. And the strong vertical line is a starting pole. It's a starting guiding the picture plane or the canvas in order to push the horses over to the right. Now I see one other contrasting pole that makes a starting line, and it's right over here. Now, when we talk about harmony and contrast are things that are different. Because they're different, they stand out. So the contrast here is a tall pole and a small pole, a white pole and kind of gray pole, a definite pole and a kind of vague pole. So that contrast between the two poles, and since they're the only really very vertical line in the canvas, they really stand out. And Degas has done this so that there's a definite line between the two poles. Now, the line between the two poles goes here and here, and that's going to be important for it to go to the top of the pole and the bottom of the pole. We'll talk about that in a second. Notice that almost all the horses have diagonal lines. They have diagonal lines with their riders, with their heads, with their legs, and especially this one behind the starting point or on the right has a lot of diagonals. Diagonals show movement and energy. So Degas wanted to show a lot of restless, nervous energy before the starting point. And so all the horses are diagonal. I first noticed this man up here on the horse. Notice that the second man has a red cap. Degas has to do something to move your eye past this strong vertical line. And so he puts this dot of red right here to make your eye go from the first rider to the second rider. And then the third rider is barely pink. So the pink of the third rider and the red of the second rider catches your attention to the left of the vertical line. What's very interesting about this is that when I make a diagonal line from the starting pole from the bottom to the top, you see this triangle? It's almost as though if you imagine somebody pulling back a bow, as in a bow and arrow, and the tension that's created by the line is like pulling back on a bow. And it's almost as if when you release the bow, this energy would be pushed over here. He's trying to get these horses to feel like they're prancing back and forth by the by the starting line, sorry, by the starting line. And that once this energy is released, like they're off, the horses will leap forward. So he's intentionally creating a lot of tension in this space. How do I know that once the gun goes off or once they say they're off, how do I know the horses will leap forward on? There's only one other place in the painting that even vaguely looks like this guy's hat. Can you find it? If you said, ah, yeah, the sun over here on the left, you'd be right. Okay. Because Degas has an implied line between this guy's hat and this, suggesting that since this guy is almost ready, and they say they're off, that this guy will be leaping forward. So there's two implied lines in this painting. One is the implied line between the starting post. The other is the implied line between the first rider's hat and the sun. As I said, the diagonal lines create energy and movement, showing the energy and nervousness of the horses before the race. Kathy Kalowitz, Death Seizing a Woman. I'm going to enlarge this so that you can see it. Kathy Kalowitz is a female printmaker, and she lost several children as soldiers in World War II. So she often did prints about the horrors of war. And what's happening here is that death has come for her child, and she can't see death, but she's not going to let death take her baby. So she's put her hand over the baby's mouth to protect the baby, and she's struggling, and her mouth is open, struggling with this unseen force, and death doesn't really care. Death is going to take her instead of the baby. Now, how does Kathy Kalowitz give you this feeling? Well, remember that diagonal lines create a lot of energy and movement. And look at how many diagonal lines are in this piece. And when you look at the diagonal lines, they seem to be going all over the place. Whenever you look at one diagonal line, there's another diagonal line going in another direction. And the reason for this is that Kathy Kalowitz wants it to be a struggle, that this movement is like back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And notice as well that the lines are dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light. And it's almost as though there's this, this heaving of breathing going on between the dark and the light, these dark and light forces. Notice as well that the very darkest, boldest area is where death is coming to suck the life out of the woman. This is your area of highest contrast. That is, it's light, it's dark, it's, let's see, there's all kinds of lines moving in different directions from it. And so when you have an area of greatest contrast, that's where your focal point will be. Notice that while there's contrast on the baby, it's not as much contrast. The baby's hair and head and hand are going in the same direction. There's a little bit of light and dark, but not nearly the amount of light and dark of the woman and the baby. This means that the baby is not going to have the struggle, but that the woman is struggling to give her life instead of her child's to this unseen death figure. I hope when you look at this that you can see that artists have very consciously used line, shape, size, placement, lights and darks, the types of strokes they use, the shapes they use, and that they are very aware of not only making a picture, but how they make a picture that you enjoyed looking at these paintings.